Um, okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of modalities of Unitarian Christian, right? Because they're kind of like second wave Protestants who are almost like Quranists, and they're trying to like go back and piece it all back together. Um, so I've heard a few different theories about the Injil. One of them being that this is what Muslims usually pick up on, is that it's just basically James, if they recognize James as the proper successor, and maybe the Gospel of Mark, and that's it. This is pretty minimal. And then there's this one guy I've been listening to. He has a YouTube channel called Jesus's Words Only, and he has some pretty good arguments that the different Gospels, maybe not Luke, it might be a later one, but like John, Mark, and maybe Matthew. Matthew's very copying on Mark, so maybe not, but at least Mark and John, which are fairly distinct, are written by actual apostles. And his argument for this, John seems like the Trinity motherlode, right? But his argument is that they
It,
mistranslated the Greek with the prepositions. So these are like, you can see this with the way they
it's really
mistranslate Quran. Well, let me just put the point out.
sure, sure.
And that when the word was with God and the word was God, it's actually not what it's saying. It's like more like the word was, the logos just means like the Risala. So this would almost be like the way that Hanbalis and Asharis think of the Quran as eternal, as like this eternal message that's with God, and not so much that there's this logos entity, right? And the problem also with throwing out John, because it seems like, well, you just want to throw out John because that's where the Trinity seems to come from most.
No, no,
It
no. I have no problem with John. That's my whole point. I have no problem with any of the gospels. The thing is, you have to read them right individually. This concept of harmonizing and picking a third from this gospel and a third from that one, and then tying it together and trying to build a doctrine is just fundamentally wrong. Because if you read John as if it's like a book of wisdom, right, you get a fundamentally different interpretation than if you read it in the sense of thinking like, oh yeah, he's speaking literally, right? Because the
sure.
entire narrative is basically spoken in this kind, again, this wisdom literature. Right.
Well, and then also the
You're,
Paraclete thing, right? Like, so the Ahmad reference in the Quran, and saying, go look, go find the messenger in what you have of the Injil. This must be referring to the various references to the Paraclete in John. Um, and then because a lot of Sunnis are very exoteric, they think that must be referring to just a literal person rather than a spirit of truth that was maybe descended upon Muhammad alayhi salam on the Laylatul Qadr, right? So that it can be both the Holy Spirit in some sense of like a created Holy Spirit. But then again, also this is another tafsir difference. Um, is that like the Shia believe in Holy Spirit being with like their Imam. So when the Sunnis say no, it's Jibril, this is, they're trying to make distance from Christianity, obviously, but I think also at some level they're trying to make distance from the Shia so that the Shia can't try to upend their
e-
usul corpus.
each each one of these, right? They, if you let's just like stick with three kind of factions. There's more, but just in
Yeah,
for simplicity,
yeah, for
you have the
sure.
Mutazilites, the Ala Quran, right? You have the Shias, and you have the Sunnis. Each one takes a different approach to the fundamental problem of interpretation. That's all it comes down to, right? The Shias, they said, look, God has designated these imams not much different than the church fathers. Whatever they say goes. Like, they don't care what's in the Quran. If their imam says that it's actually jumping jacks when you do salat rather than, prostrations, they'll do jumping jacks, right? Because they believe that they're commissioned by God as the ayat, right? The revelation of God. Um, Sunnis took a different approach. They take the Athari. They say, hey, look, let's go back to the Salaf and understand how they understood it, right? Kind of like going back to the founding fathers. How did they understand this? How did they put this into practice? And so they go and they collect all the hadith hundreds of years later. And
Right, right.
funny enough, it doesn't give them the answers. It gives them a whole new set of laws, right? So it
Sure.
failed. Then you have the Mutazilites, right? The Mutazilites, al Quran. Their thought is like, yeah, go back to the scripture, use your reason, your logic. The fundamental criticism against them, and a big reason they didn't survive, is because they're so fragmented.
Mm.
They're not a monolith, and
That's
that's
what I
kind of
like
what we're
about
seeing.
them.
So like right now, yeah, but it's like the sad thing is that it doesn't last, because you will never find two people who share the exact same ideology, so you can never form an actual religion.
Well, you could
right?
take
Like,
the
what's the
opposite
purpose? And so,
position and say that their support of the Halif making it hard to believe in uncreated Quran, to believe in Mutazila theology, exacerbated tension so much that when it eventually his grandson was impressed by Hanbal's willingness to take a whipping, that it flipped, and then they all got persecuted and driven into
yeah, mutawakkil.
fragmentation. You know
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah, but here, like, yeah, yeah, it unites them, right? But the challenge is, again, unless there's some sort of mechanism that you can say, okay, look, this is the methodology by which we use for judgment. That's why, like, you'll see among Mutazilites, why were some of them Shafi, why were some of them Hanafi, is because they know, like, look, when it comes to legal rulings and stuff like that, it can't be a free for all, right? Like, I think of this analogy: me and you, we want to play soccer, okay? We have a rule book. So we say, okay, hey, these are the rules of soccer. And then, we start playing, and all of a sudden, I pick up the ball and start running it, and I dunk it into the net. You're like, what the hell is that? I said, well, look, the way I read the rules, this is my interpretation. I interpret feet as hands and net as dunk, right? And it's like, at that point, we can never correspond. We can never basically actually have a sophisticated game, because we're going to be bickering about the most, basic tenets of what the rule book even says. So in this analogy, God sends a referee, right? The referee says, hey, this is how you understand the rule book, At the time of Muhammad, it's written in clear Qurayshi Arabic. Anyone who read it understood it with absolute clarity. 1,400 years later, not a single soul on this planet speaks 7th century Qurayshi Arabic. That's a fact, right? They're still quibbling about, basic tenets of what the Quran says. Where does the period start? What does this word mean? And because of that, it's like they have to go to these other means. And the Sunnis, they go to tradition, the Shias go to their imams, and then the Quranists, they say, look, I'll just use my app and I'll try to understand this material. But the funny thing is, again, because if you have no foundation, you can interpret it however you want. Think of this: what's the devil's scheme right now? He can't change the text of the Quran; it's locked in, right? The only thing he can do, at least for the people who want to follow the Quran alone, is distort its meaning. That's his strategy. So we need to have some sort of mechanism to say, okay, hey, we have to basically lock in the basic tenet of what this text means, because otherwise, if it's a free for all, then it means nothing.
Yeah, I mean, well, I was analogizing earlier with Naveed about the different flavors of Quranists and how a lot of them are kind of like a body, and then a lot of them are kind of Mutazili, and that you guys are kind of more like Shia in the sense that you have like a designated imam who you take tafsir from. And would you say that's a fair analogy?
There's a big difference, right? This isn't just, and this goes back to the fundamental question: was he a legit authorized messenger of God? Right? Because the imams, they have no authority, right? The ones that they attribute to Shia, okay? The traditional imams, the mullahs, they have no authority. They're just human beings. The only person designated in the Quran to have authority on these matters is a authorized messenger of God. That's why that's such a fundamental question. Because if that's not there, then again, I agree with you. If there wasn't a messenger of God, I'd be in the same camp as the Mutazilites. But if there is a messenger of God and he comes and he says, look, this is the basic, yeah, you could call tafsir, whatever, framework of what these meanings are within the Quran, and that's kind of the framework, the methodology we're working in, then it's like, okay, we can actually progress forward. And that's a big delta. Someone who's just a dude who has a really, is really sharp and smart, versus someone who's commissioned by God. Because in all honesty, I don't think Rashad was this, like, grand scholar. He had infinite amount of research. No, the way I see it is like, look, I'll give you another analogy. Me and you were in a lecture at college, okay, and we got a big exam coming, and one of our friends comes and says, hey guys, I actually spoke with the professor, right? That this guy's trustworthy, and he's given me the answers. Okay, he's given me the answers to the test. Here are the answers. Now, my take is, if I trust this guy and I know that, okay, this guy's telling the truth, I accept his answers. Now, the piece that's missing is, how did he get these? Like, why are these the right answers? In that regard, I think the individual who God, the professor gave the answers, and us, we're all in the same camp. Okay, we got the answers. Now we have to understand why these are the right answers. But if we're bickering like a deep, saying this guy didn't get the right answers, he doesn't know what he's talking about, I think he just doesn't understand the analogy of how the system works, right? Rashad did not come to these answers because he was so smart. He was so wise. No, God literally said, "Hey, Rashad, I'm designating you a messenger. Here's the right answers. Go figure it out." He takes that information, disseminates it to the rest of us. Okay. Now you got a portion of people say, "No, forget you. You're not a messenger." Another portion says, "Okay, I believe you're a messenger, but I think you misunderstood these answers." And then a small subset of us who say, "No, I believe he had the right answers. Let's spend our time trying to understand why these are the right answers."
Yeah. By the way, nice to meet you, Peter. I've listened to a lot of your YouTube videos. So thanks for coming and chatting.
Hey, peace, brother.
Yeah, it's been
Have we
fun.
talked before?
No, we haven't. No, this is my first time popping into VC. So
Your voice sounds familiar. That's why.
I gotta pray duhur in like let's say half an hour. So let's make some good use of that time if you're willing. So yeah, so okay, so I mean basically I want to accomplish two things in this conversation. One is I'd like to convince you guys to maybe adopt an interpretation of the Quran under the tafsir of Rashad, where you can be a little bit more ecumenical to the other Ahlul Quran and not takfir them so much, because I think that that would be good for this Islamic Reformation movement that we happen to be living in, mashallah, right? And then the other thing is I'd like to run through some of the finer points that I'm researching about Injil, about Akida, what Rashad's take on it was, and discuss some of those. Regarding ecumenicism, given your analogy of the task, it gives me a little bit of an opening, because if I'm like skeptical that the cheat sheet from the professor is completely based, but I look over it and I'm like, yeah, a lot of these answers make sense to me, but I don't agree with all of them. And then they happen to be all correct, but I deviated on a few of them. My score on the test will be below 100%, but it might, I ought to be able to pass the test if if we're assuming I'm only deviating on a fraction of them. Definitionally, I'm going to pass. I'm going to only be
Yeah.
off on a fraction of the answers. I might get a B or something. Um, and this is the idea. If you were to be ecumenical with Sunnis, and Sunnis would say, well, we don't think Qurani people are kafirs, but we think that if they smoke pot and they say it's not Hummer or whatever, or they don't pray right, then they might be fasiks. Their prayers might not be getting ajr. They might be incurring sins they don't think are sins, but they're still believing in God alone and doing good deeds. You know what I mean? And a lot of other sects have taken these postures, and Christians have taken these postures with other types of Christians who don't deviate on core theology and stuff like that. So would you want to come up with another analogy to say no, like Egypt's going to super hell for sure, and these other Quranists who haven't accepted Rashad
Mm.
completely, but they still like Rashad, are also going to hell, or maybe Rashad is a help and not a guillotine, so to speak.
So okay. So first off, like regarding Quranists, in all honesty, I have a lot of friends, conversations with Quranists, but I don't know if Navi shared, but look, there's different stages. I'm sure you acknowledge this too. The individuals who accept basically plain text Arabic reading of the Quran, we're going to agree on, 99% of material.
Yeah.
It's the ones who, in essence, want to reinterpret words just because, like, you take the extreme case. They say, okay, look, any derivative meaning of this root, I will accept. Then some people say, well, okay, the original Quran didn't have dots, so any root that contains this rasam, I'm going to, and then it just becomes infinite permutations, right?
Well,
For
not
me, when they
not
go down
infinite,
that
but
path,
it gets hairy for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm being, what's the word?
Hyperbolic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, hyperbolic. Um, But then when it comes to this other piece, so that's the first part, right? If someone's just reading the Quran, understands, hey, this is the Arabic text, let's just read it, plain reading, and then try to understand it, we're going to agree on 99%. This other concept of, okay, what is that threshold? I'll tell you my understanding, and it's not, how do you put it? Just hear me out, and then we can suss out the details, God willing. Okay, if someone is, let's say they have a drinking problem, okay? They know that the Quran says you shouldn't drink, but they have this problem and they can't help it. I put them in the camp of a weak believer. God willing, God helps them, corrects their way. But the main thing is they acknowledge what they are doing is wrong. They just lack the fortitude to do what's right. God for those people has mercy. The error, right, in the responsibilities when someone knows what they're doing is wrong, but then lies to themselves and convinces themselves that what is evil is actually righteous.
Well, like
Those
there are
people,
individualist
right?
Quranists who smoke pot, and they say that that's not what Hamr means, for example.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and
So,
the
so we
classical
take. Oh,
Sunni
good.
line is that if you think it's right and you're wrong, and the ijma says it's right, I mean that says it's wrong, you disagree, then you're
I make it
kafir.
Aleph,
even.
That's
I
before you
make it more
continue, may I
simple.
ask, what's your religious perspective?
I would say I'm like a Quran centric Mutazili,
Okay, thank
and
you.
I
I just
like,
wanted to see
and
where you're coming from.
I'm reaching. Yeah, it's no, it's always good to actually do, especially with these debates, to get people's akida. And I'm researching. So I wrote this book, "Who Are the Quranists?" It's on whoarethequranists.com, and my next book in a year or so, inshallah, is called "Finding
Is it
Injil."
on?
So I'm reconciling a lot
Yeah,
of things with that.
brother, do me a favor. Send me the Amazon link. I'll be happy to purchase and read it.
Well, it's on Amazon. It's free, and it's just it's hosting it on Vercel on that domain. But yeah, I'll post the link.
Yeah, if you can DM it to me, otherwise, because I'm in my car.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. So
Um,
I want to try to tackle this question real quick. Um, like Peter said, if someone has a weakness, God has more mercy towards them. It's like, okay, look, he acknowledges he's wrong. He acknowledges the law. Maybe he misses prayers, right? But he wants to do better. He acknowledges the mistakes. He doesn't defend it. This kind of thing. If someone comes in and says, no, there are no five prayers. They don't exist. There's only three or whatever, right? Or this isn't actually haram. At that point, you're not even within the confines of the religion. You're not even there, right? You're
Well,
not. You
okay, but
haven't even
to be fair though,
right.
on this one issue, this is like a procedural issue. I want to get to Akita next, but um, the Shafi school, the Jafari school, they allow combining of prayers. So on that, so
Yeah,
that
but the
now I'm
Quran
appealing to
doesn't. So
Ijma or authority a
the
little bit.
Quran doesn't though. The Quran
Well,
doesn't
Quran,
allow combining
but
of it.
Quran, when you get the other two prayers, they're not they're not strongly, and I do believe they're in there. Obviously, I agree with you on this, but they're not strongly stated. It's and into the afternoon
yeah.
and into the evening, and on the
Let's.
basis of the and, because these guys are, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq was not an idiot. I don't necessarily believe that he was infallible. Obviously, then I would be a Shia, right? But and this is kind of what we're arguing with vis-a-vis Rashad, um, but I mean, we call him Rashad as-Sadiq if you want, maybe. But
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 again, we don't need to go into a debate about the prayer times. If we want, we can debate them. But the point
no,
I'm
but
making is,
I'm just
go ahead,
saying that
sorry.
because there's the
It's.
and, if I pray
Yeah, yeah.
duhur a
No, no.
little
I hear you.
late and into the
I'm not
afternoon,
talking
I
about.
continue to pray some asr. That's kind of how
Which
If I'm
verse are you
doing
Shafi
talking
or
about?
Jafar
Which
would
verse?
rationalize that.
Which verse are you talking about?
1778, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
you know your stuff better
Um,
than I do. That's
no, no, but brother, yeah, yeah. I'm not talking about, like, say for instance these edge cases, because there are the Quran's written that is a wipe your feet is a wash your feet, right? I'm talking about
yeah,
someone
yeah,
who
yeah.
knows
That's
what the Quran says, and then basically because of that dissonance, they reverse their stance on morality. That's the one. So I'm not talking about the edge case, because say for
like,
instance, yeah, is it
Muhammad from
khamar?
God,
Is it
for
all
example.
intoxicants or is it just alcohol?
He doesn't smoke pot. He doesn't do, he doesn't do haram stuff. And when he prays 3 times a day, he's doing a good amount of time in the prayer time. And it's more or less like what Shafis or Shia do when they combine the prayers. So I don't think he would
But
be
but
out of alignment for that.
wait, who are you talking about specifically?
Muhammad from God on YouTube, he's been in the server a bunch of times. And
Oh, yeah, 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 Mohammed. Okay, okay, yeah, okay. There's a delta here though, and this has to do again with that element of responsibility. And if someone does the due diligence and they say, "Hey, yeah, I accept that Rashad is a messenger of God," right? They do become responsible for what it is that he taught, because the aspect is you cannot put your opinion above God's messenger. If someone doesn't know, right, and they're trying their best, they're saying, "Look, I'm supposed to follow the Quran, and this is the way I understand it." I can't say, "Oh yeah, they're going to hell and stuff like that." It's like, okay, what would I have done if God didn't send a messenger? I'd probably be in the same camp. The element is, once we have that additional information, then we're at that juncture where we have to make a decision.
But if somebody doesn't find the same tafsir meaning to support
Doesn't
Rashad
matter.
to then adopt
It
all of
goes.
his tafsir, then are they a kafir or are
Doesn't
they
matter.
just
If you accept, that's the whole thing, is if you accept someone as a messenger, right? You've done the due diligence, they've proven that they're authorized as a messenger of God, then you're responsible for what it is that they tell you regarding the religion. That's just the reality, right? So say for instance, it says 262 and 569. Oh, you believe those who are Jewish, Christians, the converts.
yeah,
Anyone who believes in God, believes in the hereafter, leads a righteous life, will have nothing to fear, nor
beautiful?
will they grieve, right? That
MashaAllah.
applies across the board. But what that means, it's going to vary from person to person. Someone who has an IQ of 70, who's living like, in a desolate place, their responsibility is lower than someone who's living in, Manhattan, who has access to all the information, who, has an IQ of 120. Their
Sure.
responsibility is just different,
Well, and
So it's the same thing.
I was
Okay.
I was emailing Ida and I was to write this chapter on Code 19 and how it's about epistemics. And like I'm a fan of Omar Ramahi, he's a pretty buttoned up Quranist. He's a professor and he's got some great talks
Yeah.
deconstructing. Oh, you know his stuff. Okay, cool. And
Oh, very much. Yeah.
and so for Omar, his reason for believing in the Quran is that it's very precise, that there's a nuance in tense, in degree, and all these things. And it seems like, and a lot of people kind of come to this in some way. They might
Cool.
call them scientific miracles, whatever, right? People say, okay, this seems to come from an intelligence beyond man. And then for other people, it's for Sunnis, maybe it's the appeal to the social tradition and the epistemics of the transmission from these reliable. We believe in the Sahabi and the Prophet and all this. And then obviously for you guys, the Code 19 is like taking Omar's appreciation of precise legal language and such to a whole other level. It's like a cryptographic signature that would only be highly analyzable with better technology, right? And
So
for
so
me, what made me a Muslim, I think, was reading Maida and thinking, well, if this guy was just making it all up, why would he be extending this olive branch to and trying to assert a continuity and like not making distinction between the messengers, right? And that there's this deeper message. It's not just about one guy's thing, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. He's not elevating himself. It's like the verses in the Quran about him are usually, to reprimand him for some mistake he's made,
sure.
But
And it
It's
refers
not
to him as
self-exalting.
Nabi
yeah,
when that happens, for sure. I mean, look,
Yeah.
that's why I'm in on this movement. And like when
I
like what
sh-
I'm yeah, go ahead.
I shared a bunch of verses for you in the chat. Are you able to access the chat? I just gave you like 30, 40 verses, right?
Yeah, I've been
It's
looking
like,
them up
look,
as we've been going
no,
over
just
them.
right now. No, just within the last 2 or 3 minutes, I shared them, right?
Okay.
So look, what you presented is what I'm saying is we don't have the option of rejecting information from God through a messenger. That doesn't exist. It just
Yeah.
doesn't, that's not a thing, right? So when you're saying, well, we look at the teachings from this person to this messenger, we like some of them, it makes sense, some of them it doesn't make sense, we kind of discard it. We just pick and choose a la carte kind of buffet style, going in and taking what we like. There is no basis for this in the Quran. You're out if you don't. You have to submit a total submission. And the Quran makes it very clear. You're not a believer if you're not willing to refer to the messenger to settle disputes. 465. It's in the list of verses I listed here. There's no way around that. That's the prerequisite. So, like Peter's saying, if you're exposed to this information and then you are in it, you're either in it or you're not. Once you accept everything, then you pray to God and you do righteous works and you do your best to be saved. But the prerequisite upon exposure is full acceptance. It is total submission. That's the first step. So these guys that you're describing, they haven't even reached the first step yet. There is no test. They're not even at the level of taking the test yet. It's not like, there's 100%, and if they don't accept some stuff, they can get a 90, or 90 still passing. It's a good grade and go. No. The first step is total submission. If you look at 49, 14, and 15, The first step that God tells Arab, don't say you're believers, just say you're submitters. Fully submit, accept everything, and then work on your faith and remove your doubts. That's the sequence in the Quran. There is no, oh, well, I'm going to accept these 50 verses from Muhammad, but these other 80 verses, they don't make sense to me. I'm not going to reject, I'm going to reject. That's not a thing. There is no luxury of picking and choosing any teachings or revelations from any of the messengers.
So when Ibn Kathir writes a 9-paragraph essay as a tafsir of 569 and says basically, no, you have to be like a Sunni Muslim to be saved. This doesn't really mean what it's saying. It's kind of in the past tense and it's conditional and all blah blah blah. Is he a kafir for trying to write all those gymnastics, or is he giving it his honest, convoluted take?
I mean, you know, I personally believe that the guy is a liar, a deceiver, right?
Sure.
As far as how God considers that, you know, that's between him and God. But I could say he knows the scripture well enough that he's seeing something that's blatantly there and discarding it. You know,
And
he's
like
using
hundreds of
the
millions of
mental
Sunnis
gymnastics.
taqlid with Ibn Kathir, and it's what they call ijma, even though that's maybe overstating it, but they present it as ijma, right? Um,
Yeah.
so, and obviously they've got some procedural issues with not giving enough zakah and saying, referring to other than God and the salah proper and whatnot. But, you know, we agree on all that. So, so are they all kafirs? I mean, I know you think they're all mushriks, so I guess it's kind of redundant to ask, but in this
Yeah, that's the
specific
thing. Is like,
interpretation
yeah.
idea, you know?
I mean, I feel like, yeah, you know, to say that they're mushrik is a better description. But I could say, yeah, because at the end of the day, if you reject any of God's revelations, you reject one verse, right? You're a kafir, you're a rejecter, kazab, right?
Yeah, but the reason why I'm bringing this
And
up is to try to draw the line between this 9-paragraph essay that Ibn Kathir writes and him rejecting the. It seems like he's covering the truth to me because I think it just means what it says,
oh, very much, yeah.
you know. But but I'd like to be magnanimous enough to, for instance, believe that Ibn Taymiyyah can go to Al Araf for a while because he was pretty devout, even though he had a lot of wacky ideas. We have some good ideas, you know, and so on. So, like, are people entitled? If people's interpretation is sincere, albeit perhaps convoluted, etc., maybe esoteric, it's relying on a lot of tahwil. Is that kufr or is that just batil?
I mean, to me, it's the sincerity, right? This you can pull it from the teaching of Jesus, right? You can tell the sincerity of a person by their fruit, right?
Yeah,
The seed, that's the kernel. And the reality is, like, look at what they've done with their life. You know, they basically steered millions of people away from the Quran. They gave a completely distorted message of God, and they claim that it's divine.
yeah.
That's a huge responsibility. You know, to me, it's like I can't judge what's in their heart, but I can judge their actions, and their actions are telling me that basically the seed that they planted is from Satan.
I'm going to add you real quick. So you could be manipulated by Satan without knowingly being manipulated.
Well, at some point, you know, that's the whole point, right? It's like, you know, this example in Surah 21, is it 21 6, where Abraham goes and he destroys the idols, leaves the big one there, right? And when they
Yeah,
confront him, he says, you know, who did this to your idols? He said, the big one did it. And it says, for that moment, they realized within themselves that they were the ones who were astray, yet they reverted back to their old ways. You know, I
sure.
guarantee all these people at some point had that dissonance, and then they made an active decision to disbelieve. You know, this
So,
goes back to that original point. It's like, once your moral compass is compromised, you will not be able to navigate back to God.
well, you get into bad habits, like you go on social media and get into sectarian BS every day, and that's maybe not forgiven. But I don't know if that by itself is going to nullify all their good deeds, right? Um, but okay, so
If
that's
someone if someone can't distinguish right from wrong, then the entire mechanism that God gave them in order to be able to come back to God, to be redeemed, has been destroyed. They're going to be eternally lost at sea.
yeah.
You know, and that's the thing, is God sends the occasional beacon, this acts of dissonance that hit into them, and it's not that my take is, it's never one decision. right? It's a multitude of millions of decisions that ultimately basically sever this connection that they have with God. Because even
We're talking about
contemplate, like when
habituation, right? So we're talking about the difference between hoofer on one verse and being a kafir habitually, where you're opened into this dilettante lifestyle. And you're saying that one follows the other in time,
exactly,
and the correlation
yeah,
is high.
they're joined. I wouldn't say it's like basically they're two sides of the same coin.
Not
We love to
necessarily,
look at
right?
that
Because
one
somebody like
event.
so okay, maybe Egypt doesn't do the ritual stuff, but like Muhammad maybe is a good example because Muhammad is like he's not a fasik and um and he's not a mushrik, right? Um, but you would maybe consider him a kafir because he says nice things
No,
about
no, no, no. I
Rashad,
don't.
but he doesn't believe that he was a
No, no,
capital M
no, no.
messenger.
I think again, like consider this.
And that would be covering
Once
the
someone
verses that you
becomes
share. Yeah, go ahead.
so when God told Moses to go to Pharaoh, right? This is after Pharaoh killed the firstborn. He's enslaved the children of Israel. He says, "Speak to him nicely; he may reform." But once Pharaoh saw the proofs and he became an enemy combatant, right? And he made it his mission to try to fight the truth, then he was perpetually locked out. His heart was hardened. There is no going back. Today I would not put Muhammad in that camp by any stretch of the imagination. The guy doesn't come here fighting us.
Right.
He supports.
He's
We support
ecumenical.
each other in the yeah, but we support each other in the cause of God. He's just not there. Like he doesn't see Rashad as a messenger. God
He
willing, he
even
does.
said that
But that's
Daniel
different.
Hakikachu, for all of his problems, has been, getting flack from like the NSA or whatever for standing up against Zionism, and we should respect that because we're all Muslims and we have to stand united against tyranny, right? And I don't even go that far. I don't like Hakikachu. I'm not. I he's a better man than I am in that respect. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that his or like Schweib is like more intense and they're buddies, but he's better than Schweib at this because Schweib is like saying that if you're a mushrik if you don't agree with Schweib's tafsir, so it's almost kind of like Schweib is like Rashading himself a little bit with that,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's some, how do you put it, leeway where we say, look, it's not me. These are clear verses of the Quran. They understand it. They just reject it. Like I think a telltale sign of that is when they invoke abrogation, right? They're flat out telling you, I understand what the verse says. I reject it. That's
Yeah,
different
yeah,
than,
yeah.
again,
No,
someone,
abrogation's
they're just,
dirty. Yeah.
yeah, because if
Well,
someone
it
is
might.
just not there,
Well, actually, abrogation is
okay.
good if the idea is that things are still coming at it, which I don't think you guys are on, but like if things from the Torah and the Injil are still valid, and then the verse about whipping as a punishment for zina abrogates the rajam, and therefore they shouldn't have been doing this. The Jews could do it because they're still under the
We,
Torah. That's a nice abrogation,
so
right?
Yeah, well, we believe like you can abrogate an entire revelation, right? That's so abrogation. The concept occurs twice in the Quran. Once in 2:106. The other one's in Surah 16. I want to say around 101 or so.
Mhm.
But one is in the context of a miracle. The other one is in the context of an entire revelation, right? Because the Quran itself is an ayah from God. And it's true. It's like, yeah, the Quran, it supersedes, and it's if you choose to uphold it, like the way I view it is, this is the new covenant that the Jeremiah 38 was talking about.
Okay, interesting. Nice Jeremiah reference. Well, it's interesting. It's not Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah are not explicitly mentioned. Maybe Isaiah's Idris, but maybe that's Enoch. It's one of
Zal-Kifl. Yeah,
yeah. Well,
Zal-Kifl is,
we got a few
that's my
wild
understanding.
cards
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Quran with that, but there is
Mm.
the prophecy about the temple, and that ties back into Jeremiah. So it seems like Jeremiah and Ezekiel are sort of unofficially or indirectly under the Quranic umbrella of legit.
I mean, I don't reject, because that's the thing is, it's like, when it comes to the concept of the Torah is the compilation of all the books, right, that were given to the children of Israel, rather than how it's understood by Jews,
Rather than
that
the
it's the
Pentateuch. Okay.
exactly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So all those books, in essence, I see, yeah, it has the the words of God. The only thing is, it's like when it comes to a source of law, that was a Furqan, and God says if there's a book with a better guidance than the two, right? Meaning that God acknowledges, like, look, you want to abide by the laws of the Old Testament, and I believe the Christians are still on the hook for this.
Yeah. Sure.
You have to actually abide by the book, but the Quran is the new covenant. that if you choose to basically abide by the Quran, then it absolves you of the shackles that were imposed because of some of the transgressions of children of Israel and their 613 laws.
What do you think about the Christian and Sharia being this lighter Noahide covenant plus some supplements from Injil?
Yeah. I mean, to me, if they actually upheld the Noahide, right? Because this is like, if you read Acts, that's how the settlement between
Right.
what do you call it, James and Paul was. But then that's obviously written by Luke. And then in Paul's actual writing, he pretty much makes an about face about any
I've been
kind
listening
of
to David Litwa, who thinks that it's actually polemical work from the second century rather than being from Luke.
yeah.
You know Litwa?
That Axis?
Yeah.
No, I'm not familiar with this.
I'm getting all this stuff together for my next book. I got to go back and read everyone's
Mhm.
source reference. I got to put a lot of work into it because this is serious stuff. But no, I've been learning a lot of interesting stuff just with the initial digging. There's different takes, so you're not going to convince Sunnis that they're Hadith rejectors for not seeing scholars as hypocrites, and even though if they did accept that, it might clear things up a lot. You can get them by their own Sunnah logic, making no distinction, but there's so much convolution around it. And by the way, Peter, what's your background before becoming a Muslim?
I mean, I was born Muslim. You
Oh,
mean
really?
like academically or religiously
Oh,
or?
no, I thought maybe you were raised Christian and then reverted.
No. I was born Muslim, but we were like, so I was born in Iran, and came here when I was young. We were culturally Muslim. Like, we just go to it was a Sunni masjid because that's just the one that was around. We'd partake in their activities. We had like a Islamic Sunday school, but it was like, cultural. Like they treat us like idiots, right? We weren't there studying like tafsir or anything like that,
Sure. So your parents were
troublemakers.
in the Sunni minority in Iran, and they left because of
No.
the
They were
revolution.
just to them. Yeah, but for them, it wasn't about like Sunni or Shia. It was just being Muslim. Like it was
Sure,
cultural, right?
sure.
So it's like they had no qualms about, hey, you're praying like a Sunni, you're praying. Hey,
Yeah.
it wasn't a thing like for me growing up. Most of my friends, they were like Egyptian. It's like they're all like they're just again cultural. Like if you ask them anything about tafsir, they didn't know, right? A bunch of them memorized the Quran, but it's like they didn't have any clue to what the message was. It was just you go through the motions. Yeah, and then it was in college that basically, I questioned. I was like, one, you get indoctrinated to hate Jews, like that's flat out, right?
Yeah, it's
Like you
not
go to
nice.
Muslim youth camp, you go to Muslim youth camp, and they'd just be like, subversively, like, hey, Jews are the enemy, and they'd just share this stuff, like. And I got in college, I was like, me and my brother were like, dude, what was that? Like, honestly, it's scary because 9/11 happened, and we're like, dude, we would have so easily been manipulated because the way that they portray it, they say, look, like jihad is the greatest thing, it's an honor to die in the cause of God. And me and my brother were like
Yeah.
eating this stuff up because they made it seem so like, honorable, so masculine. And
I
thank
would
God.
say my jihad is going into different sectarian camps and having chats, a hajj, you might say, as Edip would put it, and then maybe they think I'm like a hypocrite because I don't taqlid with them, but I'm like trying to give them the benefit of the doubt because I have faith that God is very just and merciful and
Mhm.
loving. Even though the Quran does have a very the Quran is extremely polemical, so that's kind of why I'm trying to synthesize with Injil and the Old Testament stuff to clear that up. But
Yeah,
okay,
I
let's talk.
personally don't have any. Yeah, I don't have any problem like harmonizing.
Yeah,
My main take for Christians is just like, look, you have to abide by the laws of the Old Testament, and you have to interpret even the New Testament in light of the Old Testament. This whole
yeah.
concept of, hey, let's view this in the light of the church fathers has no foundation.
Well, it does if you think that they are endowed with some kind of Holy Spirit imamate of some, which is what
Yeah, but
they put faith in, right?
the
So
funny
this is
thing is, it's like, yeah, Jesus was a Jew, right? He was a very hardcore practicing Jew. So was his brother,
yeah,
meaning that the earliest Christians, they were just Jewish. So when he's saying these things, you have to view them. Okay, how would a Jew understand, Hosea 6:6? How would they understand this reference from Isaiah? Not in this concept that, oh, he's teaching something fundamentally different. To
sure.
me, it's just like, look, there's no way someone can come and say, yeah, Abraham and Moses and Ezekiel, they're all preaching a Trinity. They just never said it, right? It's like
Well,
it's such a stretch.
the Orthodox Christians. So I've been listening to a lot of Jay Dyer, and he's not very ecumenical. And
Yeah, yeah.
most of Christianity have gotten into this glom where it's like as long as we're Trinitarian, we're okay. And we respect each other's ecclesiology and sacramentology, which overlays with these debates about Imamate or Rashad or the Sunni imams, and then how do you pray? And they're kind of there's a lot of analogies in that, and it's good, it's done
Mhm.
them good. I mean, look at the United States, right? Everyone's kind of respecting each other's religion, and there's this good Christian
I'm all about
ethic,
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
there
yeah.
used to
It's like
be, you know.
like
Um,
as far as politically, I'm a hardcore libertarian, hardcore, right? It's like,
okay,
look, the only function of the government is to make sure that people have their basic liberties. They're not killing each other, enforcing contracts, defense. That's my stance.
but you wouldn't
My
want to live
take
in
is
the
like, look,
UAE because the
of
UAE is
course
kind of
not.
like
No,
that.
no, absolute. Well, my whole take is like, look, you have to have absolute freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Like these are the essential tenets. That's primary. I could care less about the stuff after that. That's the thing that's the most important.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, if you're gonna force your religion onto someone else, then you don't have, it's no longer a choice.
Do
It's
you, on that
compulsion.
note, do you believe that the United States is one of the more Islamic countries in this Quranic
Oh, by
sense?
far.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
kind
the
of
reason
see it
I'm
that
here,
way too.
hands
What do
down.
you think of the
Yeah.
Freemasons?
I really don't know much about them. It's like they had a couple lodges. You hear some stuff. You watch the conspiracy videos and this and that. And I'm
Yeah,
like, it's one of like honest. This is my again with very limited information. I think it started as just kind of a fraternity of people who were theists, but then it morphed into this like weird kind of like occult practices. That's what it appears like to me.
well, I'll tell you one thing. They have a similar theology to the Neoplatonists who were critical of Christianity or who combined it with Christianity, and also with some of some of the Akbarian Sufis who talk about the Hakika Muhammada, the Logos, and the universal soul. They believe in a divinely simple God who's like the Platonic one, and so they're like, yeah, we're monotheists, but then they're not like they feel a little bit antinomian. That's why they're free, and but they believe in constructive things. That's why they're Masons, right? So then with the American
Mhm.
founder deists, it was like this, and that they probably do have some connection to the Knights Templar, who have some syncretic influence from their time in Jerusalem, from these early Sufis. Was those centuries were when a lot of the Sufi tariqas were founded, and so anyway, getting a little weird, but I think it spices things up. So on that note, one of Rashad's teachings, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is basically affirming the classical Sunni tafsir that Ruh Qudus, Holy Spirit, is just a synonym for Jibril. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, so this would be one point where not just I don't have, like not like a personal problem, but I have like a logical problem with the Taqlid Rashad train because for one thing, my reading of Ahmad and the Paraclete and Mani and Manichaeanism is a similar etymology. That was a title for more praised, and Muhammad is the praised one. So it's like there's a continuity in the Quran and with what Mani was trying to claim, which is plugging into this porthole that's in the Gospel of John, but also that it's not just a person in the Gospel of John; it's a spiritual, it's in you. The spirit of truth will be in you. So that
Mhm.
what was in the messenger on Laylatul Qadr can come to us, it's to some extent, by praying for guidance and earning it by not being a phasic and other things, right? It's not just ask
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
get it,
So,
right?
like the concept is that Gabriel, he's a commission with carrying, God's wahi, inspiration.
Hmm.
So, when it says, and if you look in the Quran too, like inspiration is not limited to even messengers, right? Moses' mother received
Yes.
inspiration. The disciples received inspiration. The bee received inspiration, right? This is something that's accessible to everyone. The only fundamental difference between the inspiration that someone might get versus a messenger of God is that the inspiration the messenger of God gets is for the sake of being disseminated to others. right? Like
Yes.
when Moses' mother gets the inspiration, this is something personal. And I believe everyone gets that, right? It's like you think, hey, what inspired you to come to the server today, right? It's could be one of two things. It's either God or it's Satan. Those are the two possibilities.
Well, inshallah, mashallah. Huh? Inshallah. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to build bridges, you know. So I think that's from God.
No, yeah. Praise God. No. I think. I mean, look, the intent of this server is to have that kind of like open platform. I mean, obviously, we have our understandings, this and that, but we're always open to discussing, debating, or sharing. It's not a
Well, and I like it
we're
when
not
the
in the
discussion veers into debate in a very truncated thing, and for like a minute or two, and there's kind of an if then that's put down with some proofs, and then you kind of come back to the discussion and it stays in that flow, you know. Um,
yeah. I
it's not
agree.
great for
That's the
time
best, but
management, but
sometimes
it's
sometimes
better.
we get the people are just straight up hostile. They
Oh
got
yeah,
their
well,
fingers in their
'cause you
ears.
guys are culturally Americanized very much. So Americans like are big talkers, and then culturally Arabic people are also like, oh man, let me, you know. So I hear a lot of this in the debates you guys have, and I've heard some of the debates on the Farahi server, and I like their methodology, except for the what we're getting at, these deeper Akida issues and the esoteric tahwil, and frankly, you know, the support for Rashad as a capital M messenger is also sort of an esoteric tahwil of these key verses, right? And it comes from like what you would say would be the guidance that would put you
Yeah.
on that belief, right?
Good question for you. Yeah. What's your take on the Ferrari? I can never say Ferrari. Uh, what do you call
Well,
it? Kind of.
before I
I
answer
don't
that, I
know
want
if
to
they
tell you
call it a
about a
madhab or.
Quranist guy that I met on Twitter who was in the army. He's from the UK, and he reverted to Islam, which I don't know if that forgives the sins for killing people and probably in Iraq, but that's kind of his problem. And he gets into it with Sunni guys, so he's like way more hardcore than any of you guys or Schweib. You know, he's like
Hey, what's his
cursing
handle? I think I've
Sunnis.
engaged with him.
Oh, you have? Okay, you know who I'm talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like
Yeah.
he's like a mujahid Quranist. He's like the most mujahid
Mhm.
Quranist that I've met. And only a revert could be that mujahid as a Quranist, because usually born Sunnis will kind of fall out and then they'll kind of gravitate, oh no, but I still believe in God, and you know, and then they're like a little more chill. But yeah, so if that guy was the leader of a country, he would be like running extermination camps of Sunni Muslims, and it would be like he wouldn't be killing the kids in Gaza, but he'd be killing some of their parents. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not sure if that's the right thing. So then, on the flip side, you look at India and Pakistan. India is religiously diverse. Pakistan isn't, and yet it is because you got Shia, Sufi, Imamate, etc. There's some Ismailis there. So when I say Shia, I mean 12 or Shia. They stole the brand, but Ismailis are also. I think Ismailis are more Shia than because their belief in Imamate is actually held up. But anyway, um, we can talk about the Ismailis in a bit. So when you get down to the scale of Islam, not the United States where Muslims, or I live in South America, there's like 5,000 Muslims in my country. Neighboring country, 1% of the population is Muslim. It's a little better. United States, it's 1.4% of the
Wait,
population is
where are
Muslim.
you based out of?
I am in Chile.
Oh no way. That's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah. But I'm a U.S. citizen, so I came down here about 10,
Yeah,
11
no
years
doubt. I
ago.
mean, from the I was gonna say, I'm like, if you're a native Chilean, you're Americans, very
No, I'm like super
split.
American still. Yeah, don't worry. Um, I'm about as American as you are. But yeah, we have like a certain way of talking, right? Um, so so like at some point you need like a book of fiqh, right, in order to run a whole nation Islamically. And then even then, like look at Pakistan or conversely Afghanistan. One's going in kind of one direction. They're both screwing it up, right? So I think that something like the Farahi school is good for fiqh. And that you need this to keep people from going benoodles, and that the tendency is that Indian middle class Muslims who aren't so much into like setting people on fire for perceived blasphemy would be attracted to the Farahi school. And I think that their kind of neo-Mutazila epistemic approach is constructive. However,
I agree with you. Yeah, so let me chime in on that. I agree with you as far as on principle. But what I'm noticing, and I'm curious if you're seeing the same, is you're getting a lot of these, kind of, let's put it this way, more fanatic Sunnis
Yes.
claiming the Farai because they want to give the allure that, hey, this is an academic pursuit regarding like Hadith criticism, but they're just Sunnis in disguise.
Well, there's just a lot of tax here on that server, and some of them are not Farahis. They're coming in to like nettle them, as people will do on the Quraniyun and Progressive Islam subreddit, or maybe probably this server. You've had a few of them, but usually you and Naveed engage with those people directly and put it on YouTube, and it's like so it's not like this nettling phenomenon. So that would be my criticism of their Discord server. But as far as like having a new madab that's basically Mutazili type madab, I think it's something that we need. If you're going to rule, like, so look at the Kalikata in Nigeria, right? Nigeria is like even more hardcore and worse off than Pakistan, or maybe India's a better analogy because there's a lot of Christians there. So it's a diverse in religion, not just in Muslim sect. And then the Kalikata, like, because it's Nigeria, I don't know if it's necessarily their fault, but they get into this idea that like, hey, these Sunnis are basically Boko Haram, even if they're not Boko Haram, but they're not just, they're mushriks. So they're taking this extremist Quranist position, and then they get into scuffles, and maybe they don't set out to kill people, but people end up dying, right? And I don't know if I don't know the statistics on how much it happens relative to just general crime or beefs between Muslim and Christian or whatever. Nigeria's got a lot of problems, right? So we have to analyze Kalikata group in Nigeria, trying to factor out some of that background noise. But you can see how it lends itself to a very sectarian. It makes a sectarianism out of Quranism, you know, and which is going against the Quran. So yeah, I
So
mean, I think,
wait. So
yeah,
okay.
no,
So I just
please.
wanted to kind of tie this together. So okay. So it sounds like your main contention is you're not feeling some of the explanations that Rashad has given. Is that fair to say?
Well, okay, so with the Holy Spirit in
One of them is
particular,
the
with
that
the
one, for example.
yeah, that's a good example because it's actually key to like the research I'm doing. Having kind of digested a lot of this Islam sect and Al Quran sect stuff, now I'm kind of trying to move on to this more esoteric headspace and drill down. Well, before we get into the Holy Spirit, what's Rashad's position on divine attributes? Does he have a Akida position on that,
Go,
like the
Peter.
names?
Yeah. So regarding the names or the attributes, because that's like one of the
Well, in
discussions
Ashari, they're the
itself.
same thing,
You know,
but maybe they're not for Rashad.
no, I mean, because the concept is you have this the concept of, say, for instance, the most gracious, the most merciful, right? But then you have the aspect of, okay, God's face, God's hand, right? What does that constitute? Anything in reference to you could say to God, to the hereafter, to the unseen. These are purely given in terminology where we can understand, right? So it's a, you could say it's allegorical in that sense. You know, it's spelt out in a concept where, again, a human, because think, okay, here's a way to contemplate. Anyone who thinks that they can grasp the mind of God, is severely mistaken. We are to put an analogy, we're
Sure.
closer to pawn scum than we are to our creator. So God is giving us language in a way that, again, like, imagine if you had a child and you want to display to him good behavior and bad behavior. If you see him doing something bad, you'd say, hey, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to put an angry face, I'm displeased. And that gives the child understanding, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I'm not supposed to do. But as far as actually understanding, okay, what does this mean in the realm of God? God knows. This isn't something that I'm getting from Rashad. This is just, again, from my study of the Quran, that when it has to do with these things of the unseen, they're only given it to us in a way that, by analogy, by metaphor, by allegory.
So he's like Akida agnostic then, at some level.
Yeah, I mean, it's the concept is: do we believe God is forgiving? Yes. What does that mean to be all forgiving? Infinite mercy. It's something our minds can never fully grasp.
Sure.
Is God, like, say, God? Here's an example. Like, if you listen to the sermon he gave regarding God is doing everything, he goes into depth explaining, like, we cannot fathom what that even entails, what that means. And he just gives, these examples to show that, like, look, even before you do something, God already knew, God has already planned for it. And it's not just that he knows, he's actively the one who's making it, putting all the chess pieces together.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And I mean, this is what the authorities like. I think the Athari Creed is problematic because with the Hadiths, they end up recreating the Hubal idol, and that they believe God is this like evil
Yeah.
overlord as well. So it fits that they're basically worshiping Satan. But the methodology of Athari is just you read it and you don't ask how, and you stop in the Hanbali, not in the Tamiyan approach where he starts to philosophize it. I guess it's fine, right? And this is like in Sunni ecumenicism, as far as as that umbrella goes, which is the calling people Rafidis and blah blah. Blah. It's not that big, but it's big enough that there's like 1.5 billion of these people, right? And they say, yeah, that's fine, and then you can be an Ashari. They don't say it's okay to be a Mutazili, even though Ashari is kind of hybrid of Hanbal and Mutazili, right? But Rashad wouldn't say, you have to believe that the attributes and the essence are one or that they're distinct and we don't know how. Like it's just fine. Like I don't impose that on you.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, look, we read it, we try our best to understand it. But anyone who says that yes, it's it's this exact same thing, it's like no, you'll never be able to fathom when it says there's nothing like God. We have to take that to heart when Jesus says, you know my thoughts and I don't know your thoughts. We have to
Right.
take that to heart.
Right. I
God
mean,
is
if
giving
Jesus
us these
Islam's willing to
little
say that, then we gotta that's a
exactly.
or
So it's
like I
like, look,
love I
God is
recite 110 kaf ana basharu mithlukum yuha, like this is the sunnah is this humility, right? Um
mhm.
so good stuff. Okay, so regarding um regarding the ology of revelation, does Rashad believe in an eternal Quran like in the Hanbali or Ashari sense?
He never got into the weeds, but what's funny is
Okay.
if you actually look at the history regarding this concept of the createdness of the Quran, what you realize is the position that the Sunnis hold today is fundamentally different than what the Sunnis of the yore actually upheld. Today, the Sunnis are more akin to kind of like how Bukhari understood it, where it's like, okay, the Quran was always eternal in the mind of God, but it was created when it was revealed into this world. But
Yeah.
the earliest Sunnis, their interpretation was that no, if you're the Mus'haf is eternal. If you recite the Quran, that act is eternal, and it just gets to the realm of absurdity. Uh, so it's like where their position is now. It's something. It's like yeah, and it has to do. And it honestly, my take is this entire argument became because of their exposure to Christianity. Where
Yeah.
they said, "Look, is the word eternal?" They said, "Yes." So therefore the Quran is eternal. They said, "Yes." Therefore Jesus is eternal. They got stumped.
Right. That's why, yeah, exactly. And they always lose debates with Christians, the Atharis and Asharis on that basis and a few other points. Um, yeah, exactly. If you're not
Yeah,
making
but
distinction between them, well, if you say no, but Injil is a book and it just got lost because he completely failed at his job. But if his example in Hadith, if he himself is Kalimatullah, then the Kalima have to be created, or he's in a Trinity, and like then you're back to that.
yeah,
Well,
I
and
mean,
also
to me,
with the
my
yeah. Go ahead. Well, I wanted to bring
yeah,
up
no, it's
the
just
famous verse that you guys love
go.
to cite about what other hadith after this will you believe? So the Quran is referring to itself as hadith, and that the etymology of hadith is to happen. So if I say, "Oh yeah, I saw Jim, kicking the vending machine, and the thing fell out," that's trite as it is. That's a hadith. It was a happening that I'm narrating, right?
Not even
Um,
just happening, right? Because it could be a statement, it's a narration, it could be an innovation, right? Just depends on how. Even hadath, means passing of gas, which is kind of funny.
yeah.
Did you? On the side note, like, you familiar with this hadith? They say we don't have anything from the Quran, from the Prophet, except what's between these two bindings, and a couple of them says including what's in this paper, right?
Uh-huh.
And the paper is basically it's a full blown condemnation of hadith. Okay, but some of the interpretation they say no, this is it's not to be taken seriously. It's not hadith, it's hadath, and they think it's about passing gas. Like
That's funny.
it's a yeah. So but the concept in the Quran of which hadith I'll speak for myself, and this is how I understand it is God knew that this is the terminology they were going to use for this entire corpus, right? They could have called it anything, but they chose to call it this. And it's explicitly condemned in the Quran. The funny thing is, if you ask, the traditional Sunni, they'll say the Wahi is hadith, right? Obey God and obey the messenger's hadith.
Right.
Hikmah is hadith, right? Everything else is hadith except for the word hadith, right? They say,
Yeah.
oh,
So I mean,
that doesn't mean hadith. Like, oh,
these ideas of
okay.
revelationology. So like what you just said is basically that like a lot of people will drop out of Islam because they'll read the dual Qarnayn story and they'll go, well, wait a minute, this isn't the historical thing. And if they're told, no, you have to accept that everything in this is like a literal narrative that literally happened. Like fundamentally, the Christians went through this, right? And then they adopted modern. Well, maybe origin wasn't wrong. Maybe the Genesis, you can read it as a metaphor. But actually, like the Quran does have this condescension built into it, that it is contextually like making this is an Arabic Quran, so it is easy to understand. It's lowering itself to the level of literacy of these people, and then a lot of these hair splittings about specific words and their etymology, and that they have compound etymology because you can look at the Syriac, you can look at the Aramaic, and what did it mean what did it mean in Hebrew? 800 years earlier, it's a cousin word, right? And it's like, well,
Mm.
it has an intentionally limited vocabulary for like a realpolitik, a fact, which was to get all these people going to Medina basically, and then transforming the region. Um, Among other things, obviously, this conversation is an epiphenomenon of the Quran, right? And then when we talk about like whether the Holy Spirit is specifically an intellect of an angelic form who has a job, going back into the Bible, of transmitting text, transmitting hadith, right? Um, and that, Jesus was supported with the Holy Spirit so he could talk as a baby. This is from the infancy gospel of Thomas, which was one of the Gnostic ones. And that may be a condescension. It might not mean that. It might mean that the infancy gospel of Thomas was inspired, or it might mean that God is just transmitting this as a reference because the Syriac, sort of the heterodox Christians would have seen something in it, right? Either way. And that he's a baby. So a baby, if you whisper something, I have a 2-year-old. I say things to him and he repeats them. But when he was, an infant, he couldn't do that. So even if Jabril is like, "Hey, you're a prophet," an infant who's normal isn't going to be able to do that. So if the Holy Spirit is this other thing, and we're not relying on phenomenology, right? So or metomony. So like the Sunnis do this. They say, "Oh, Nabi and Rasul are interchangeable." And you say, no, they're precise, right? So that's kind of what I'm saying is that Ruh Qudus and Jabril, or the mighty angel, that this is from a mighty angel, that these are precise usages. And that the Wahi is a more self thing. And you can get both. You can have Jabril come to you and Ruh Qudus, right? So in Surah Qadr, they descend the angels and the Ruhu, right? So people say, oh, that's just saying they descend the army and the general, right? So it's a subgrouping. And this was the hermeneutic that I believe I read on the website that Rashad took. And this is the Sunni tafsir tradition. And I just don't know if that's entirely
Hey, Aleph.
accurate.
Yeah.
So,
I got to drop off, but
yeah, me too.
praise God, it was
Yeah,
a
I'm here.
good conversation. I think, yeah. So just peace out. God willing, to see you more on the server.
All right, inshallah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Okay, so now you're at a crossroads, right? You have a preconceived or a developed notion about Ruh Qudus, right? The identity of Gabriel, whatever, and then it differs from the messenger of the covenant. So what do we do? What does this mean? Does that mean he's not a messenger? Does that mean you have to reject it? Does that mean this is the crossroads where the Quran is faced with dealing with our messenger, right? Because like, there's two possibilities, and it's tough. It's really difficult because you put brain power into this. You've studied, you've analyzed, you come to a conclusion, and it's like a slap in the face for this guy to say, "No, it's not like that. It's actually Gabriel is Ruh Qudus." So this right? It's real crushing. It's real crushing. It's identity crushing to just be like, okay, well, this guy's a messenger. I'm just going to accept what he says. The best part of the test is the most difficult test.
Maybe there's a third option, and that would be that if the Shia are correct, that there is this other mechanic from God, and then Surah Isra says, few know the truth about the Ruh, right? Which can also mean our souls, or it doesn't say Ruh Qudus there, but but you know, it is what it is. We're having this conversation. Um, and that the 12 or Shia are maybe not, maybe they went off on a tangent with that, but that, and then the Ismailis aren't correct either necessarily, but they're not wrong. So this is trying to be ecumenical here. So there was a time where their moms would have said, you know, only the Ismailis are upon haq, right? And the other people are not fully. They would have taken the same position you're taking. They would say, well, they don't know. We're doing Taqiyya this century, you know. And then the Aga Khan has taken, you know, he's done some very modern things, outlawed polygamy and some stuff like that. And he's basically said, you know, non-Ismailis are fine, and we're here to help. The role of the imam is not to
Yeah,
like
yeah.
cut people off from salvation; it's to build schools and guide people. And then I've talked with a lot of these people, and they believe in some wacky stuff, almost in a different angle from like flat Earth Quranists and whatnot. But you know, I don't agree with everything they believe. I'm not an Ismaili, but I like them. They're nice people, and they seem to have good
But
energy, right?
this
And
approach is fundamentally broken. Like this is not a practical approach, right? So we can't like what you're saying is like this is like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like this idea of like, look, you come to the Quran and then you pretty much just explore all the various sex ideologies, schisms, madhabs, whatever, and then you just kind of pick and choose whatever seems more logical and consistent with your perception of the Quran, right? This is kind of what we're talking about right now, and we're saying, well, look, God has made it easier. God just streamlined the process. God sent a messenger with the right conclusions, like Peter was saying, and we just got those and we try to figure out why they're right. It's not a question of if they're right. We're going to the domain of why are they right? How are they right? Let's substantiate them. That's it. Because we're divine. We're accepting these as divine knowledge. Because of the age of 40, Rashad says, God told me this. So there's no realm, there's no paradigm under which I can say, well, look, you know,
did he
maybe he
say
got
that
this wrong
about the
because
Jibril tafsir?
well, I
Is
mean,
is that part of the
which
package?
I mean, I would assume it is because he's identifying an angel of God. It's kind of a core issue, and it's in many verses that he translates, right? And so I don't, right? So it's like,
But we don't have a hadith that you're out if you have a different take on Ruh Qudus
um,
or
yeah. So
Rashad
I
hadith.
don't. Right. Well, we don't. This is not hadith, right? Because hadith are lies falsely attributed to the prophet containing laws outside the Quran. Here, this is a legitimate interpretation of the Quran, and we can affirm it is from Rashad. So it's not a
Well,
rumor. It's not hearsay. And it's not constituting a law separate from the Quran, right?
but a
So it's not saying
submitter,
doctrinally is prohibited.
someone who's a submitter could say that this is just like Rashad is agnostic about Ashari versus Mutazili, blah blah blah, Akida. This might be in that
Yeah, but he
in that
has
realm.
taken a position on. Yeah, but on this topic particularly, for example, he's taken a position. He says the Holy Spirit is Gabriel, and he talks about this many times in many audios, many instances, many
Okay,
of his translation footnotes. So he's taken a solid position on this. It's not open for interpretation. But yeah, if there's a topic that he hasn't taken a position on, then it's up to us to try to figure out how we make sense of the situation. Right. So for example,
so then
he says
is
Gabriel
Jabril is Jabril the spirit of truth who is in us, like per Gospel of John, and who is in
I think
abundance
Rashad
in
I
the
think
Paraclete
I think
vis-a-vis
I think
Ahmad?
Rashad claims himself to be I think Rashad claims himself to be the spirit of truth. That's
Right, but that's because he's in a
in
special
the
relationship with Jabril.
yeah, but I think he's claiming himself to be the spirit of truth,
Oh, like
not
his
Gabriel.
soul. Oh, so he's the Paraclete.
Himself. Yeah, so if you look, so he's citing John 14, 16, 17, John 16, 13. Both of
Yeah,
those refer to the spirit of truth. Yeah, the Paraclete, exactly. He's referring to himself as being that.
but those say not those specific verses. By the way, they're very. You guys really know your verse numbers. I respect that. Um, but Rashad's spirit is not in me or in you, or is it? Maybe he died and now he's diffuse in all of
Well,
us who
I
want
think you're
him.
talking about the verses around it. So maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's just a different tafsir of those verses. So the verses themselves doesn't say that they're inside of us. It says, I will I will ask the Father and he'll give you another paraclete to be with you always, the spirit of truth. And so
Yeah,
he's
there's a
saying,
few
okay,
mentions, but in
now,
one of them it says, "And the Spirit will be in you," and this is why Christians don't accept like the
which verse
Abraham
is that?
rising. reading, which you can get from
I don't,
Adnan Rashid, right? Like,
yeah,
which
I'm
is
not aware
this
of
is a
that one.
common Sunni
But
position, but Christians don't
yeah,
accept
but
it for
here,
this
but
preposition.
I can just say, but I can just say, oh, that portion is corrupted or it's mistranslated or it's changed or altered,
You
whatever.
could
Like
say
I'm
that.
just gonna take the
You
part
could
that,
definitely say
yeah,
that. And then
I'm just
this
gonna
is
go
like
with the
the
part that
classic
Rashad
impasse that
used.
happens in debates between Christians and Muslims, or in this case, between Quran-centric Mutazili
Submitters,
and Submitter, right?
submitters, right?
So
So
I gotta do more research on
you
the
need to you
Greek
need to verify.
of Gospel of
So
John.
wait. Yeah, but here's my thing. I'm saying it's a much simpler process rather than translating all these things and going to Greek and Hebrew and all this various analysis. It's very simple. Do you affirm Code 19 is true? It sounds like you're leaning towards just ascertaining this fact. If Code 19
I
is
think it
true,
is,
that
and I think God intentionally left it incomplete so that this level of exclusivism would not
what do
be
you mean?
supportable.
What do you mean incomplete? What's incomplete?
Well, the
Incomplete about
controversy about the last two verses, and also the whether there was an aleph, which
it?
funny enough
That's
is my kunya
wait,
in
wait.
the
Last two
there are a few
verses.
little things that people debated.
Yeah, the last two verses are pretty definitive. We have overwhelming evidence to refute the last two verses. Even if you go by Hadith, Hadith rejects the last two verses. They're not classified as mutawatir. So there's nothing to do
Hmm.
with the last two verses. We've found 7 dimensions in which they don't work: historical analysis, linguistic, stylistic, textual analysis, mathematical analysis.
Do
Like
we have
every
manuscript
angle we
evidence for
look
a
at.
kirat that lacks them? That would be
No,
maybe the.
because the original. My understanding is the original Quran was the complete Quran that was attached to the Birmingham manuscript that was destroyed. Now, what's interesting is this is all after the Uthman compilation, which ironically the date is 651, 19 years after the Prophet dies. So the only Quran that I know of that is dated to the time of the Prophet is the Birmingham manuscript. So I believe that's part of the original Quran, which was destroyed. The history tells us it was destroyed. Then, at the compilation process, the Hadith says that Khuzaymah ibn Khuzaymah al-Sabit ibn al-Ansari shows up. He's the only one with these 2 verses. Aisha, Hafsa, Omar. Nobody knows about these verses. This guy shows up like, all right, what do we do with these verses? They slap it in, put it in the Musaf, and then that just becomes canonized as part of the Quran. That's not even a legitimate. I'm putting it in the chat right now. I just put a VC1 dash chat. We're finding more and more historical sources of Hadith telling us these verses are suspect. Why would you need an entire corpus of Hadith, substantiated verses? Why are verses even in question in the first place? Right? So this already now is it a coincidence that the verses that were always in question, the only verses that were ever in question historically, are the only 2 verses that stand out like a sore thumb with the Code 19. Code 19 is an advanced antivirus system. It detects viruses and eliminates them. All the pointing factors point at only these 2 verses. Oh, it just so happens, hey, they contain some blasphemy in this verse. It calls Muhammad Rauf Rahim. There's an exclusive name for God. Oh, there's 26 words. 9 of them disrupt the code by 1 each. By 1 each. Oh, the Hadith already rejects them. Oh, wait, the top of the Musaf chapter for regarding the chapter 9, it says,
How are
these
they
last 2 verses were
blasphemous though? It
Meccan.
just says a messengers come from among you.
Because
Grievous is
it
what you
calls the prophet.
suffered.
Yeah, it calls the prophet the name of God, Raufun Rahim. Right? So that's an exclusive name of God, Raufun Rahim. And I can show you
Well, that's
all
not
the
in the translation. That's in
locations.
Arabic.
This is an Arabic expression. I'm putting it in the chat right now.
Okay. Yeah,
So
because I'm not
8
seeing that
times in
in.
the Quran. Yeah, right here. 2:143, 9:117, which by the way is 10 verses before the false verses. 16:7, 16:47, 22:65, 24:20, 24:20, 57:9, and 59:10. Every time God is referred to Raufun Rahim. These guys want us to believe that Muhammad has the same name of God in 9:128. Right? They want us to believe that Muhammad is called Raufur Rahim when just 10 verses earlier, God is called Raufur Rahim.
Well, this is a little bit like the Salafi idea of shirk and attributes, which is like maybe a bit of an innovation because I can be kind and merciful to people without being the most kind and the
If
most merciful.
at a minimum, well, first of all, this is interesting because Yusuf Ali translates it as most merciful. How can the prophet be most merciful? That doesn't even make sense.
Like,
The
well, he's the most
translation of the
merciful out of the whole population,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I
Not
mean,
not
look,
an
Adam, this
ontological
is.
sense.
I'm not claiming this is a smoking gun, but at a
Yeah.
minimum, this is a red flag. This is at a
Maybe this
minimum, it's
is
a red flag.
a
Yeah.
mercy from Allah so that people can appreciate Rashad's message without joining fully and still go to heaven,
But
inshallah.
God told Rashad that these are false verses. We have overwhelming evidence with Code 19 that they're not part of the Quran.
Right,
There's
but
no
that's
way
like a
out of
circular
this.
logic because if you're in the thing, then you'll accept that, and if you're not, then you'll say, "Well, I
No, no,
like
no, no,
what
no,
he
no.
says," but you know.
Well, you can. Well, no, because you independently verified he's a messenger, and you can independently analyze the Code 19 information that basically rules these two verses out. One example again, 26 words, and 26 words. Okay, and these two false verses. 9 of them disrupt the code by 1 each. That's not a coincidence, right?
Mm.
Code 19 is real. I've just put another one in the chat, another image. These are the 9 words. Look, by 1 each, they're multiples of 19. 1 extra for each word,
I
right? And this is
remember
just
Shabir Ali referring to this in a debate with, I think it was Nabil Quresh, or
yeah,
maybe
or
another
yeah,
context.
or
So, I mean, this
yeah.
idea has gotten a lot of currency in the Sunni, what you might call the Sunni mainstream.
Not enough. Not
Not
enough.
enough, but
Not
it's gotten
enough.
current. Well, Shabir Ali, a lot of them don't consider him a Zindiq or whatever for just being basically a nice Canadian fella. But you know what I mean? Like it has gotten a lot of current. And some people just laugh at it, but they'll believe in
Yeah.
miraculous hadith
Code
prophecy. But but
Code
it has done
19.
something without them being
Code
even Quranists or Semitters, right? Like
yeah.
so,
Yeah. It's
it's
very
accomplished
limited.
something for the Dawah, and I don't know if it's made any
If you
Christians flip, but
Well, on this server, it has. That's for sure.
okay,
We
so
have
it has
Christians
made some
convert to
people
Sunni.
flip. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the bottom line is that Code 19 Israel. I would not call it incomplete. You're calling it incomplete. I would call it complete. It identifies what the Quran is, the Qira'at, right? Because now we've resolved the issue of the Qira'at. We are claiming
No,
that we
that's
have
definitely
the
interesting. Yeah.
original. We are
But
claiming we
also
have the original Quran of the Prophet.
well, okay, so a big tautology of being a Muslim within Orthodoxy and with the Quranists, a lot of them as well, is that the Quran is preserved. And so whether you believe it's like metaphorically the word of God, in like an Ashri sense, or literally letter for letter in the Hanbal, you know, you have to believe that it's been preserved. And the fact that I can see in the translation where Sunnis insert bracket text and footnotes to justify raping slaves and their specific theology ideas is maybe evidence for that, right? So that's something I appreciate. And then I got to study the Bible. I got to go back and look at Hebrew and Greek, and then was this a rabbinical Wikipedia war against Christian? You know, like it's hard to tell, right? So, but by that logic, the fact that this issue is an outstanding opening does maybe mean at least that God is willing to be merciful to people who are your ecumenical adjuncts, but not fully on your doctrine. This would be my
Look,
argument.
in the Quran, yeah, in the Quran, it says if you put your opinion above the messenger, all your works are nullified. It says you're not a submitter, not a believer, unless you're willing to have the messenger judge in your disputes.
Well, that's what Sunnis
Right?
say
There's just
about all
not.
of us, right? And that's what
There's
Shia
no.
say about
Yeah,
all the
that's what,
Sunnis, because that it would extend to their imams, right?
if hadith were true and God opened the door for hadith in the Quran, then they would have a point. Because I would
Yeah,
just accept everything Muhammad said. No problem. He says, don't urinate in the direction of Mecca. Right? So I would use a compass every time I'm urinating to make sure I'm not doing that. That's an
sure,
affirmed hadith. Right?
sure, sure.
But they have no standing for that position. Right? We are saying no. We have actual teaching statements from the messenger giving us the correct understanding of the Quran. We have to hear and obey. If we don't, then we're out. We can have
Well,
endless philosophical dialogue about stuff, but at the end of the day, like Peter said, there's no religion unless you have a referee to judge in our disputes. That's really what it comes down to.
okay. Well, I mean, and this is the common thing is what's the correct lens on the Quran, and then do you have to accept it, or is there a new where you're going to be disqualified for samaj, or you're going to be more of a fasik, but you're still a believer in some sense, and that this also extends to the 569, et cetera, about the other monotheists. So yeah, it's very interesting. Um, I think I got to leave it here. My kid's going to sleep, and it's time for me to pray, and I will make dua for guidance on this topic. Um, and inshallah, I will
Hey, Pete,
receive
have you read Appendix 1? Read Appendix 1. Study that carefully. And
appendix
then
one of what
we have
of
of
Rashad's
Rashad Khalifa.
translation.
Yes.
Okay, can you link me to that in the this one
Yeah.
last
So I'm
parting gift?
going to put it in the chat right now, Colin. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, brother.
Right there. He gave you, yeah, I mean, we just put it in like 4 different ways. Yeah, he gave his book, Appendix 1, an interactive book. I haven't seen that. It looks interesting. But
Okay,
yeah,
let's
read
check
Appendix
that out.
1. Oh, this is interesting. I've never seen this before. This is interesting.
So, I'm gonna save this. I might post this to the Chronist if I gotta set up a YouTube
Where
channel.
are you? Yeah, where are you at? What channel are you talking about? Where is this?
I don't have a channel yet, so I'd have to set it up to do that. I just kind of
Oh,
pop in
no.
on
When you said I'm gonna, no. When you said I'm gonna post it somewhere, what are you referring to?
to the Qur'an subreddit.
Oh, Qur'an or something. Yeah. Right.
No,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think it's an interesting discussion. Okay, but like one last thing before I go. Given that Rashad, so you're like in the Imamate of Rashad. I'm like a Zaidi, where I'm like, yeah, there's some guidance there. I'm not sure about the like infallibility. And then Shia Hadith people would say, oh, well, the Zaydis aren't really Shia, but whatever, right? So we'll agree, for now, we'll agree to disagree at that point. But I'm close enough. I'm like a Zaydi to a 12, right?
sure.
Like in this regard. But
Uh,
like, is there enough flexibility in Rashad's tafsir that you guys could adopt a slightly more ecumenical posture, not tack-fearing the other Quranists, inviting them to the wisdom, assuming that if they're not fully convinced, then they're not incumbent, etc., and
no,
maybe we have more unity amongst the Ahl Quran, inshallah.
it's not. It's not possible. We can invite them when we do, and we're open. Our platform's open, and we're open having conversations and stuff. But if they reject our message, reject our messenger, then they're out. There's nothing to do. And
But what if they're
Rashad took a
nice?
very firm.
What if they're nice? Like, for
If
instance,
they're
a Seventh Day Adventist who's Unitarian who thinks that Muhammad was probably divinely inspired, and they don't follow Quranic Sharia. You might say, well, that's pretty good. Or like Isaac Newton was like this, and then
obviously we prefer people to be Quranists than Sunni,
yeah. So
in
maybe
many
they can.
regards,
So
sure.
that's they're getting less
But
dirt on
if they're
that
going to
way.
actively preach against our message or go against our messenger and our teachings and our coherent doctrine,
Sure.
then they're hostile, they're hypocrites. And Rashad made his position very clear about this. This is Rashad's position on
Well,
this.
he was
This is
facing a
this
lot
is
of
how he dealt with the
polemical
Quran.
backlash, and he got murdered for it as well. So that's
Yeah,
most
yeah.
polemical
But
backlash you can
but
get.
what's interesting, but in the last few months, he's not even going after the Sunnis as much. In the last few months, his main target are the Quranists.
Yeah.
I just put an image of it. This is November 1989, Submitter's Perspective. He's calling out the Quran. He's not going after Sunnis in this article. He says, he's talking about the hypocrites. He says, one of their most common utterances is, we do not need a messenger. We can worship God alone and follow the Quran alone without any need for a messenger from God. Thus, they rebel against God's system. God sent messenger. He says these are hypocrites. They're wicked. They're rebels. They're out. He's taking a firm stance against the Quranists that reject him.
Well, and a lot
Right?
of
So there's no.
Quranists find in this interpretation of Islam a great freedom, a sort of libertarian, a spiritual liberty of
That's what
worshiping
they
God
want exactly.
directly without intermediary.
There is no intermediary. It's still information from God. That's in the list of verses that I gave you. But what's interesting here is that you're right. The Quranists, they feel when when they leave Sunni Islam to become Quranists, they feel the shackles have been lifted on them.
Yeah,
Now they're free to just do freestyling on so many things, interpret the Quran. It's very liberating to them. That's how they feel, right?
yeah,
And so when we tell them, "Hey, come to submission," we have clarified, clear doctrines that we adhere to. It irks them. They're scared. They don't like it. I want the liberty to make up my own interpretations of the Quran. I don't want to be told the answers. And they get stuck with that. They
yeah,
cannot.
yeah.
So they get put in a really bad place. But it's like, that's just what it is. If you reject the revelation from God, you're just out. There's no way around that. We can't
So
compromise with
if
this.
if they are nice about Code 19 and they're like, yeah, there seems to be something there, and they don't speak ill of Rashad, and they're not fully signed on, maybe we can. That's respectable.
Look, yeah, so 88 to 90 talks about how to interact with the hypocrites, right? So I'm putting it in the chat. Here you
No, but
go.
maybe they're not
So
hypocrites to God at that state. They're just maybe they're Muslimin but not mu'minin because they're not fully on
but if they
signed up.
reject, but if no. The Muslimin fully submit. They just have doubts, and then they work on eliminating those doubts. You're not
Oh,
even Muslimin if you reject. If you're not on board with accepting the teachings or the revelations from God, there's no way
but they're not
forward.
rejecting.
But
They're being
here,
respectful and they're acknowledging that there's guidance from God coming through this individual,
yeah,
but they're
but they're
not fully
respectfully
on your
rejecting.
denomination. That's all.
They're not. They're respectfully rejecting though. Either Rashad is a messenger or not. If they say no, Rashad's not a messenger, then they rejected him. Now you can do that respectfully. They don't have to call us names and label us and verbally attack us, but they just if you reject the messenger of God, that's in the Quran. We can talk about the verse 4150 151. Here we go. I can put that verse in the chat. Here. So it's 4150 here we go. I was starting my chain. So here. Here you go. This actually describes them very well. Right. All right, put it in the chat. I see what you often said and rejected those who disbelieve in God as messengers and seek to make a distinction among God as messengers and say, we believe in some and reject some and wish
Right.
to follow a path in between.
But I mean,
These are the
this is the
these are the
keystone verse that, for instance, Dr. Shadi al-Mazri made in favor of Sunni Islam, presumably not including the Shia, Sunni Islamic exclusivism versus Dr. Javad Hajmi, who's more of a modernist who, thinks that maybe the Christians are okay. So, I mean, this is a classic, key juncture here. And then I might make the
they
argument that because a lot of Muslims don't believe that the Injil is with us, that they're Hadith rejectors and they're rejecting. They say they believe in Jesus, but they don't really believe in Jesus, like Islam, because they're not following the Injil because they don't think it's legit Hadith. And you know what I'm saying? I gotta go. My kids are trying to put it
all
down.
right, all right.
So I
Good
think this
talking
is
with
a
you.
great place
Also,
to stop because this is kind of a stone in the train tracks for multiple debates, not just this one regarding exclusivism
yeah. Well, I just want to
versus
mention the
some.
next verse says I just want to mention the next verse says these are the real disbelievers. That's it. So you pick and
Yeah.
choose messengers. You reject and accept and reject messengers, then it says you're the real disbeliever. So there's no way forward with that. I'm going to give you a bunch of verses that we use in our discussion with Quranists. You can examine all these. I've given you a ton of verses.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that,
Yeah.
and
God willing.
it's been
Thanks for the peaceful dialogue.
absolutely, brother, absolutely. Have a Juma Mubarak to you, and I
You need
wish
to
you.
accept. Thanks, Juma Mubarak to you. I need you to accept my friend request so I can message you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm
Or
gonna
I
do
guess
that
add me
right
as a
now.
friend. I can't even. Yeah, it looks like your friend request is closed or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I get a lot of a lot of crazy spam, but yeah, I just accepted.
Okay, I
Um,
send it to you. All right. God
all right,
bless you.
mashallah, bro. Peace be upon you all.
God bless you. Peace be upon you. Take care.
All right, cheers.